Well, hello, my name is Aitor, and the title of this talk is Undergraduates' Perceptions of an EFL Course During the Pandemic, a comparison between online and blended learning. Here you can see the outline of this talk and the contents of the different sections. With the outbreak of COVID-19, educational institutions had to adapt their teaching methodologies to the situation imposed by the pandemic. Higher education had to abruptly implement new changes, and thus new guidelines for teaching and learning had to be applied. University learning environment moved to fully face-to-face learning to online learning, mostly technology-based. Such a transition bore some impacts on the different courses at university, but mostly on EFL courses, which are preeminently physical. Setting these as a key preoccupation, the main objective of the present paper is to provide empirical evidence on early years undergraduates' perceptions about a series of mediating variables during the pandemic, such as different learning conditions, that is, online and blended learning, language learning skills, or affective variables on an EFL course. As mentioned before, the introduction of new methodological perspectives in higher education led to an abrupt implementation of remote teaching, giving rise to a vibrant strand of empirical research on how COVID-19 might have affected the different agents within the educational setting. Most of this research has been based upon the effort of universities to offer lecturers a myriad of courses and resources to carry out what has been called emergency remote teaching. The term itself leads us to consider the different challenges in its application. Firstly, the application of traditional face-to-face methodologies in an online environment. Secondly, lecturers had to become accustomed to the new learning environment and hence adapt all their teaching materials to the new online setting. And third, the fear to the unknown, as digital competences are not a skill that everyone possesses. In a nutshell, this led to manifold perspectives in higher education when implementing this internet-based learning, ranging from merely uploading documents with activities to real synchronous computer-mediated teaching. Added to this, one has to bear in mind the effect that some intervening variables in the teaching learning process bore, such as students or lecturers, the motivation, the disadvantages of receiving asynchronous feedback, as well as delayed help. All right. Now, I will review some of the most important technology-based learning methodologies. Firstly, the concept of distance or online learning has been characterized by the adjective that precedes it. When distance is used, hence remote distance learning, it might refer to both time and space. However, if remote learning is used, in that sense, remote learning, it simply refers to distance in space, but not necessarily in time. Within distance or online learning, two types of computer-mediated communication or teaching methodologies are identified. First, asynchronous computer-mediated communication and synchronous computer-mediated communication. The first one, asynchronous, entails the permanence of the content over time, giving rise to deeper reflection, and the resources that might be used could be discussion boards, forums, automatized or semi-automatized quizzes, or through the use of learning management systems such as Moodle. And this type of learning is warrant of more paucity in the learning process. Conversely, synchronous computer-mediated writing, computer-mediated communication focuses on real-time connection, which might include online chats, that is to say, text-based synchronous computer-mediated communication, or video conferencing. In other words, synchronous computer-mediated communication intends to counterbalance the disadvantages of the detached nature of e-learning by providing learners with the paucity of online communication. Likewise, synchronous computer-mediated communication favors this synchronicity by promoting second language learning through operative, collaborative interactions between learners. One of the most widespread modalities of synchronous computer-mediated communication, especially in higher education, has been video conferencing, given its similarity to the on-site classroom. Many are the video conferencing systems such as Zoom, Microsoft Teams, which include chat functions allowing for co-constructive parallel communication. In the same way, the pedagogical opportunities of video conferences are equally seen as furthering the production of more discourse. Also, previous empirical evidence has suggested that among the language learning affordances of video conferences, it might be facilitative of the development of speaking skills. Video conferencing allows learners to interact with both the material provided by the teacher or the teacher himself or herself, as well as other direct sources. So there has been also some support to e-learning and teaching given its multimodal dimension, because it can be synchronous at the same time, but also it allows you to perform other actions at the same time. Nonetheless, even if fully online learning has been the norm in the immediate months after the pandemic, some universities began to implement blended learning, which is a combination of technology and face-to-face lessons in an attempt to better confront future crises. However, the appearance of blended learning goes back to the 1960s, but its implementation has been considerably slow given the limitations. For example, the lack of customized learning experiences, such as a one-size-fits-all approaches, or the communication modality, because it is not the same teaching face-to-face as online. In short, blended learning relates to an educational approach where teaching and learning are implemented both virtually and physically. Among the many tenets of blended learning, we find learners self-regulation, time and space flexibilization, online availability of materials, the stimulation of the learning experience and peer interaction, bearing in mind that we are both physically in the classroom, and then we will find some activities or extra engaging tasks in the online version, and also creating the effective learning atmosphere. Some theoretical endeavors have attempted to integrate these tenets under the so-called community of inquiry framework as a guide to an effective conduct of both online and blended learning. The components or essential, according to COI, are first, teaching or teacher presence in terms of curriculum, learner-teacher or learner-learner interaction, and learners' engagement. Second, social presence in terms of as interactive communication between learners to express the sense of belonging to a community. And finally, cognitive presence, given the necessity of a problem-solving feature. Thus, the main objective of the present paper is to shed light on how early years education undergraduates perceive two types of learning conditions, both online and blended learning, and the effect that both conditions might have on certain perceptual variables. The research question and the different sub-research questions are the following. What is the probability that students are influenced by the online or blended learning condition in terms of e-learning preference, either blended or online learning, learning and teaching methodologies associated with these online and blended learning conditions, effective variables in general, dealing both with autonomous learning, individualized attention, language skills, dealing with writing, reading, use of English, and peer interaction, as communication is the main core behind, or the main rationale behind EFL courses. The method regarding the participants and the context where this research was conducted, this is exploratory research, 29 early year education undergraduates took part in the study. They were all university students in a yearly compulsory EFL course comprising of 9 credits, and whose lessons were structured into 1 practical hour and 1 theoretical lesson a week. But the situation for this group was very specific and was hence one of the motivations to conduct this study. During the first semester, both practical and theoretical lessons were conducted fully online. During the second semester, practical lessons were moved to face-to-face, while theoretical ones remained online. So we used, the instrument we used was an ad hoc survey with a total of 18 items encapsulated into 5 major blocks, which we will present later. The internal validity of the survey was checked with 2 Chromebox tests run on both pre-test and post-test. And as we can observe in the values, the internal validity was confirmed. Regarding the major blocks of the survey we have, they correspond to the different research questions. Regarding statistical analysis for our study, Bayesian statistical methods were used instead of the commonest frequencies methods involving p-values. To check the significant relevance of each test, Bayesian hypothesis testing, together with Bayes factor, was used. Given the small sample size, non-parametric Bayesian statistical tests were used. Bayes factor were characterized and measured following this benchmark. Right now, we move on to the results of our study. The first research question inquired participants about their perceptions about the type of teaching learning methodology. The pre-test focused on the preference for online learning and the post-test focused on blended learning. As seen, undergraduates preferred blended learning, given the high Bayes factor and the median of the effect size, which is 2009. The second research question focuses on the features of learning and teaching methodologies, and as seen, major statistical differences were only relevant as regards question 4, if online and blended learning was the best way to learn a foreign language, and question 4.15, whether one of these modalities facilitated autonomous learning. The Bayes factor indicates that blended learning was more adequate for learning a foreign language than online learning, given the moderate evidence. On the contrary, undergraduates believed that none of these conditions were facilitative of autonomous learning, as the evidence was anecdotal. As regards the rest, learning context, attention to lecturer's explanation, or this type of learning fits well with my education needs, no big differences were perceived, statistically speaking, between both conditions. The third research question inquired about a series of effective variables. As seen, undergraduates found blended learning to be more motivating than online learning with moderate evidence. Regarding individualized attention, participants believed that the blended learning condition was more propitious for these, as we can observe in the strong evidence. Regarding anxiety, contrary to what we had predicted, no significant differences were found in any of the conditions, and no improvement was perceived whatsoever. The fourth research question inquired about the perceptions about linguistic skills in each condition. As seen in the Bayes factor, weak and moderate evidence was found, meaning that participants saw no differences in their linguistic skills, either in the online or blended learning condition. Finally, the fifth research question focuses on the perception about peer interaction. The high Bayes factor indicates that there is strong evidence suggesting that blended learning provides more fruitful conditions to develop peer interaction. We can observe that the Bayes factor is very high, so there is strong evidence that suggests that the blended learning fosters peer interaction, contrary to online learning. Our findings confirm what previous research has pointed out. Firstly, undergraduates prefer blended learning over online learning for foreign language learning contexts. Similarly, the motivation factor does not seem to be present in either online or blended learning, although findings indicate that individualized attention is fostered by blended learning more than in online learning. Contrary to what was predicted, anxiety did not increase in the blended learning conditions, and values were maintained for both. Also, as we can observe, peer interaction increased in the blended learning condition, contrary to what previous research indicated. Several conclusions might be drawn from the present research. There is a clear disregard for technology-based language learning, especially in terms of effective variables, but also linguistic skills. Nonetheless, the arguments provided in the previous slides are tentative given the absence of digital literacy variables in our survey, as well as socioeconomic factors, previous linguistic backgrounds, among many others. Likewise, the small sample size makes it difficult to extrapolate the findings to the whole university setting. So further research should explore whether similar perceptions are present in students from other degrees, their digital literacy, or the potential influence of face-to-face learning alone as an independent variables. Thank you very much for your attention, and should you have any questions, remember to post in the discussion board. Thank you very much.